If I'm so smart, how come I can't beat that guy at a board game? Just can't do it. I gave up a few years ago. I said, that's it, we're playing ping pong. I got a chance at that. Well, my name's Doug Lisle. I'm a psychologist. It wasn't my first choice. My first choice was to be an artist, and should have been an artist, and wanted to be. God knows I had the talent. But my father refused to give me the emotional support, and more importantly, the financial support that my talent so richly deserved. History will judge him. As much as I like to process my issues about that today, and believe me, I would really like to process my issues about this. It's not what I'm here to do. I have to do this psychology thing. And Alan dragged me into the psychology thing and dragged me into trying to figure out little problems like why it is that if we were lucky enough to trip over the writings of a Herbert Shelton, or later on, John McDougall, Dean Ornish, T. Colin Campbell, Alan Goldhamer, Joel Furman, if we were lucky enough to trip over these people, people that have dedicated their lives to telling us the truth and discovering the truth about how health works, if we were lucky enough to find them and hear them, why is it hard to follow their advice? That's what we're here to try to figure out. So in order to do that, I'll show you some charts and graphs, and I'll show you some, tell you important scientific facts, but more importantly, I'll be using some of my artistic skills to really bring home how this works. Now, we're going to start out by asking and answering the greatest philosophical question of all time. Now, everybody knows what this is, of course. Of course, it's a shark, man. That was never in doubt. It's a great white. You can tell by the distinctive markings. And the great philosophical question that we need to figure out today is, why does a shark have teeth? A shark has teeth to eat. Oh, thank you very much. You just chirped right up. Yes, a shark has teeth in order for it to eat. Why does a shark eat? It eats in order to survive. It's exactly why that shark is going to eat. There's a lady right here in the front row, and I could just tell you, ma'am, that after you go to psychology school for all the years that I did, you learn something special. You learn how to read people's minds. And it turns out that I can read her mind. She's thinking with information this interesting coming out this early in the talk. She's glad she got that seat right up here up front. A shark has teeth in order to eat. It eats in order to survive. What's the point of its survival? What's it doing here? To keep the population in balance. What it's doing here is it's here to reproduce. That's actually the point of all this effort that's going on. That if this thing is, as you can see here also very cleverly shown by the artist, that a reproducing shark is a happy shark. And what it's trying to do here is to see these little sharkies, if they're fortunate, if they keep right at the same problem that their parents did, then they'll get to do this thing all over again. Over and over and over again. This has been going on like this for 400 million years. Now, this may seem entirely pointless to you and to me, but this is what life is. Life has a cycle. This is what's going on here. And we could complain to the management. We could ask them the great questions about why this is even happening. And I'll leave ultimate questions like that to philosophers and theologians and people like that. We'll let them worry about the ultimate causes. My interest is figuring out specifically why, or actually it's already been figured out. The biologists have figured out why this is happening, and the reason why this is happening is to pass on DNA. Okay? Now, one question is that we're going to try to figure out is, how does the shark know how to go about its business of eating, surviving, reproducing, etc. How does it know how to do these things?
Instinct.
It has instincts, okay? And where are instincts and what are they? Where are they located?
Brain.
They're located inside the brain. And what instincts actually are is their neural circuits. They're actually electrical circuits. Just like this equipment has electricity going to it and it does a specific thing, and so does this microphone, and so does your TV set or a radio in your car. Those things have electrical circuits. And when you put power to those things, they do specific kinds of activities. And the same thing is true of minds. That minds are basically circuit boards, is what they are. And instead of having electrical wires or copper wires, things like that, what you have is neurons. They're made out of tissue. And instead of having regular electrical current, whether alternating current or direct current, what you have instead is neurotransmitters. Ultimately, little pieces of food that get pulled apart, put together in particular chemical combinations or chemicals, and what those chemicals have is electrical charges. And when those charges flow through those circuits, the organism has experiences. Okay? And depending upon the type of organism that it is, it has particular types of experiences. That's why in the future, 200 or 300 or 500 years from now, depending upon how optimistic you are, you're out there in Star Trek time sometime, if you had some poor hippopotamus that died as an accident, and you had some poor shark that somehow didn't have an olfactory system that was working right, and you said, well, I know what we're going to do. We're going to take that hippopotamus's olfactory system, and we're just going to sew it up there right into where the shark's olfactory system is, and where the shark will have an olfactory system. What's the problem with this? They're completely different neural circuits. They're doing the same job. They're both olfactory problems. It's trying to help the organism smell, but every organism is like a living library of its forgotten ancestors. And in the case of a shark, that thing's designed by nature to smell a single drop of blood in 1,000,000 gallons of seawater. That's what that olfactory system is. A hippopotamus doesn't do anything like that. It probably can't even smell blood. So it doesn't do any good. Every organism has its own particular library of instincts that tell it what to do under certain conditions that help it survive and reproduce. Now, even though every single organism has a different nature, so sharks have shark nature, hippos have hippo nature, chimpanzees have chimpanzee nature, and humans have human nature. So human beings have their own particular library of instincts which make them what they are and what we are. However, despite the differences that you see, just as if you power different electrical devices with power, they'll all do different types of things, we also have certain characteristics that we share with all other animals on the planet. There's a general motivational architecture to why it is that creatures do what they do. And these instincts, so here we are, they're neural circuits. I'm a little behind here. What they have is they have 3 motivational properties. There's 3 ways they go about doing things. And the first thing they do, or the first thing that they're trying to get accomplished, is they're trying to feel good. Okay? So there are ways that they can interact with their environment that will cause good feelings to go off or activated in their brain. And so, for example, what we might expect the 2 major pleasure mechanisms to be would be what? Food and sex. Food and sex. Yeah, you've heard this somewhere before. Food and sex is exactly what it is that's flashing through organisms' minds like a neon sign. That they're simply going through, this guy's going through the ocean, food, sex, food, sex, food, sex is what's happening. Unless he's what? Unless he's a male, then? It's sex and food. Okay? That's exactly how this thing's going to operate. Can't help himself. That's just how he's designed. And in doing so, with that, the nature of that design, that equipment in there to guide him, this is how it is that it's more likely that he's going to leave DNA on this planet. Now, there's a whole host of other mechanisms that he needs, not just pleasure, but he also needs mechanisms to tell him when he's making mistakes, that he's doing things that are going to reduce the likelihood of the gene surviving. So, for example, if the water's a little too cold, it'll move to where it's warmer. If it's a little too warm, it'll move to where it's cooler. If it's a little too dirty, it'll move to where it's cleaner. If he scrapes himself on some fire coral, it'll move away from that area of the ocean and won't come back. So this thing basically has all kinds of methods to find out when it's put itself in circumstances that are going to reduce the likelihood of survival. Just like the pleasure mechanisms are basically the positives, these are what feelings are here. What we're seeing is that how organisms feel is simply a signaling device. It's an accounting system. And when things are feel good, that's telling you that you've statistically increased the likelihood of survival. And when things feel bad, it's telling you that you've decreased the likelihood of gene survival. And that's how this thing works. Now, throughout the last 6,000 years of recorded history, these two things have been spoken of many times. You'll see them in Scripture, all different kinds of holy books. You'll see them in great books, works of philosophy, that these two things have been identified all the way down to Tony Robbins, that pleasure-seeking and pain avoidance are these two giant motivational properties of organisms. But it's going to turn out that there's a third that has been overlooked, but it's very, very easy for us to figure it out. If there's a tuna flopping in the water 20 feet away and another tuna flopping in the water 40 feet away, which one does this guy go for? All things being equal, he goes for the one 20 feet away. Why? It's easier, better chances of getting it. Ultimately, he's conserving energy. Okay, so there's a principle of energy conservation that organisms need to have wired in there, because basically, if you take two sharks, both with pleasure-seeking, pain avoidance mechanisms, and one of them is swimming around in the water and sees these two tunas and says, well, I don't really care which one I go for, 20 feet, 40 feet, what do I care? I'll just sort of flip a coin today. I don't have any strong feelings about it. That's not as good a shark as a shark that always goes for the one that's 20 feet away. Okay? If you could add that chip into the decision-making of an organism, that will improve that organism's ability to survive and reproduce. And that's what you're going to see all over nature. You're going to see predators going after the weak, the sick, the slow, the young, the isolated, and the injured. They're going to do that automatically. They have beautiful engineering in there to see even the slightest stumble of a gazelle on the African savanna, and that cheetah knows just which one to go for. Okay? It's doing that because it's got ancestors that made those decisions, ancestors that had mutations that happened to be excited, a little bit more interested to make the decisions going for the compromised gazelle. Those are the ancestors of the cheetahs that you see today. Okay? And so throughout the animal kingdom, you're going to see energy conservation measures that are going to be distributed in all kinds of ways through organisms. This is why fish swim in school. This is why Canadian geese will fly in that characteristic V pattern that will keep them drafting on each other to save a precious little bit of energy in their migration. And there's just one other reason the geese fly in that pattern. Anybody know why they do that? Yes? It's easier, absolutely. That's a very important reason, is to help draft on each other, just like race car drivers do. There's one other reason. My mother tells me, don't tell people this, but I just have to tell you, just in the interest of being thorough. If they fly in that V pattern, when they poop, they don't poop in each other's face. Just thought I'd share that with you. All right. Now, so these are going to be the three things that Alan and I have termed the motivational triad. And we were all excited when we laid this out in our book, The Pleasure Trap, and we were a little bit worried making this grand sweeping statement. This was in about 1999 or in the year 2000 when we were writing this, and we felt very proud of ourselves but also a little worried. And then fortunately, I discovered the great biologist George Williams, one of the 3 or 4 most respected biologists in the world, had identified this in 1994, and that made me feel a little bit better. Safer ground, but then we didn't get there first. All right, here's our shark here. He's happy, however, because he's surviving and reproducing, but is there more to life than just the pursuit of pleasure, the avoidance of pain, and the conservation of energy? That's what we're going to look at now, and we're going to see whether or not there's something else. So we have to look at another type of thing in the world to see, and everybody, of course, knows what this is. No, it's not a pacifier. Is this helping? It's not a bee. This should be clear now. Of course it's a bird, ma'am. That was never in doubt. This is a gray shrike. It's a gray shrike. You can tell by the distinctive markings. Now, what this guy does, this is a proud bird of prey of the Mideastern desert. And what this little guy does is all spring long, this is a male, he kills bugs and gathers little stuff, and he pokes it on thorns inside of his territory. That's what he does all spring long. Anybody want to guess why he does this? Tracks a female. There's a man back here that knows how the world works. That's exactly why he's doing this. It could have been a lot of things. He could have been saving the food, but no, that would be too practical. He could have been marking his territory, sort of, not really, but what he's really up to is he's going to attract a female, because the reason is that what happens is later on in the spring, after all the hard work's done, the females fly into the territory, they fly around and see which guys have the most stuff in their tree, and then they mate with the guys with the most stuff in the tree. What a surprise. This actually helped us figure out a really interesting sociological puzzle that was taking place in the Silicon Valley in the 1990s in the boom time, why there were so many BMWs parked in trees, but we figured that out. All right, that's why this guy does things. Now, what's interesting, this is me explaining to you why he's doing that, and he's winking here. Really well done by the artist, in my judgment. Now, what this guy's going to do is he's going to do all this work, but we're going to see that he's quite a bit different than the great white shark. The great white shark sees a mate, goes towards the mate, sees the food, goes towards the food. Not too complicated. Okay? There's no huge time lag between why he's doing what he's doing, what he's doing and the motivational stimulus. This is quite a bit different. This guy is going to diligently be working for weeks at his project before the females ever show up. There's no female in sight. Now, we might think, now, how does he know to keep going? How does he know what to do? And also, how does he keep the motivation forward? Why would he bother? And obviously, the answer is instinct. But the question would be, how do those instincts work? That's a lot different than the shark that sees the tuna in the water and would have a little pattern in its brain, a little visual pattern that it matches and knows that that's food and then goes towards it. Not this guy. This guy is acting as if he's got a conscious intent. He's actually acting like he's got a little image in his head of that, the female Shrike, and that he's thinking, wow, I better keep shooting baskets or working on math team problems or trying to join the football team or all these other things that never worked. But the point is that he should be doing, he's doing these diligent things in order to position himself to get a little bit closer to winning a female. That's what he's doing. How does he do this? Well, we might think that, and certainly we know why he's doing this. At the end of the road here, there's going to be sexual activity, and sexual activity is going to cause pleasure. And what pleasure is going to be caused by is a flooding of dopamine in the pleasure centers of the brain. That's how this is all going to work. And this is all being orchestrated ultimately by DNA. So DNA is pulling his strings. He's like a puppet, or basically he's a vehicle, and the DNA is the driver. And the DNA is driving him to do things in a certain way that will statistically increase the likelihood of that DNA being copied. And that's why he's doing what he's doing. But that doesn't tell us about how his motivational system is working sort of inside of his own mind. That's just telling us what the outcome is. Now, you might think that the way nature worked this is that every time he does something well, where he kills a bug and puts it on a thorn, that maybe it gives him a little bit of dopamine, a little bit of pleasure, to remind him of the big pleasure to come. That would be a reasonable strategy. But it's going to turn out that's not what nature did. Nature invented an entirely different experience and a whole different area of the brain, an entirely different neurochemistry. What nature invented was a different incentive system to go along pleasure and pain right next to it, and to be integrated with it, but to be fundamentally different. And what nature invented was the moods of happiness. What happiness is a guidance system. These are feelings to tell organisms when they're on their way to things that have important biological consequences. So if the pleasure is here, he has moods of happiness that tell him when he's doing a good job of killing bugs and putting them on thorns. So here he's having a good day and things are going well. But the next day a rainstorm may come and blow all of the stuff out of the tree. That's not a good day. Then he puts a bunch more stuff in the tree, and that's a good thing. Now a competitor comes and tries to just take his tree and his territory from him. That's bad. He has to fight the guy off. The girls come. He's got a good tree. He gets mated. Everything's great. We have a happy ending. Okay? But in the course of it, what we had was a lot of life experience that didn't have anything to do with pleasure or pain, not directly, but instead had a different experience. That experience are the moods of happiness and the moods of unhappiness. And that's how they are related to pleasure. So if you're a grandmother and you've taken your kids to San Francisco or your great-grandkids to San Francisco, and you're taking them to some cultural event, that's going to help educate them and be fancier people. And then you've got them in the back of the car, and you're coming out, and it's dark, and you can see that you're low on gas, and you're a little bit lost. How do you feel? Doesn't feel good, does it? Okay? You've got some anxiety. That's a mood of unhappiness. It's not sadness. It's a very specific kind of unhappiness. It's signaling danger right now in the present. And so now you take a turn and you're looking for some gasoline, and suddenly you're in a rough-looking neighborhood. How do you feel? Now you're even more anxious, feeling a little guilty. Why didn't you fill up the gas before? All these things are going through your mind. You're actually very uncomfortable. Nobody's even fired a shot or brandished a sword or even given you a dirty look. It doesn't matter. You can tell that by environmental cues that you're statistically less likely to escape this day with your grandchildren intact. Okay? Now the odds may be infinitesimally small that any bad thing is going to happen, but it doesn't matter. You can pick it up. Your mind is that well engineered to figure that out. Now you take a turn and you see bright lights and you see a little sign that says Mill Valley, and that's where we live, and everything's happy. Now how do you feel? Relief circuits go off. Okay? Your mind is constantly shifting back and forth between happiness and unhappiness of different kinds all the time. It does so many, many, many times a day, probably 1,000 times a day. And it's all shifting as a little signaling device to tell you whether your genes are a little bit more likely to be in the next generation or not. And that's how this thing is organized. Now, what we're going to do with our friend here is we're going to do something interesting. We're going to put him in a cage, and in this cage we're going to have a couple of buttons. And on the left button, if he hits the little button on the left, what's going to happen is he's going to fly out in the aviary and he's going to start killing bugs and putting them on thorns. But if he hits the button on the right, this little button here, that's kind of a magic button. And if he does that, he's going to be presented with a female who's all ready to rock. Now, what's this guy going to do? This is a good time for all the men in the audience to just stay quiet. Just don't say anything. Just say like, I don't know. Okay. Ladies, what do we think he's going to do? He's going to hit the button on the right. Now, he will hit the button on the right, the one where the female comes out of a little secret door. As soon as he figures out how that works, that's what he's going to do. The question is, why? He's going for the dopamine. In other words, he's looking for pleasure, but the other way will get him pleasure as well, ultimately. Why would he do this? The conservation of energy. That's exactly what it is. If we look back to the motivational triad, both of those ideas will cause the pursuit of pleasure. One of them is better at avoiding pain. In other words, if he has to fly out of the aviary, what's going to happen is he's going to expose himself to predators and competitors, so there's a little bit more likely that he could get into trouble. And then finally, the conservation of energy really settles it. That if he can just hit the button and have the girls show up, hey, that's it. He's done. Okay? There's no question the motivational triad dictates what this guy's going to do. Now let's look back at this same problem, and now what's going to happen, we're going to put him here, and this button is going to be the girl who's all ready to go, but this is going to be the magic button this time. And the magic button is going to be a little lever inside of a little glass pipe that we drive into his skull, and we put it down into the pleasure centers of the brain. And in that glass pipe, what we put is cocaine. And so when he hits that button, what's going to happen is a little cocaine is going to get dumped down to the pleasure center of the brain. And when it does that, it's going to activate an increased concentration of dopamine in that area of the brain, which is going to be exactly what's going to happen during sexual activity. Now what's he going to do? He's going to hit the magic button. And why is he going to hit the magic button? Because the conservation of energy will work again. Why put up with all the humping and pumping and complaints? Who really needs this hassle? Okay? The truth is what this guy's going to do is he's going to go right for the most concentrated flood of dopamine that he can get with the least amount of trouble, and that's what he's going to do. Okay? So in the average laboratory animal, if you give them this research paradigm, give them this experiment, what's going to happen is the average lab animal will be dead in about 10 to 12 days. Because what's going to happen is that even though they're getting exhausted and they haven't slept, they'll keep hitting that little lever. Even if they're really, really hungry and haven't eaten, they'll keep hitting that lever. Even if they're really thirsty and they're super dehydrated, it doesn't matter, they're going to keep hitting that lever. In other words, the pleasure mechanism is so potent that they'll keep leaning on it even though they've got all kinds of other pain mechanisms that are telling them, don't do this, this is too expensive. It doesn't matter. The pursuit of pleasure will override this. And as a result, and the reason why is that the pleasure, that kind of dose of pleasure is telling this creature that it's doing the most valuable possible thing that it can do, which is to reproduce DNA. It's being fooled. Okay? This is a trap. Okay? This is a trap where we know enough about the motivational systems of organisms that we can literally cause them to commit suicide while they think they are being incredibly biologically successful. Now that is an extraordinary upside-down command of a nervous system. Okay? And as you can see, incredibly dangerous. So what we're going to look here is really quickly about, just one second here. If we pulled this guy out of that trouble and we made it so that every time he got addicted, we pulled him back from the edge, we put him in little birdie rehab, we got him okay again, we put him back in the cage and he hit the thing again, he got into trouble, we pulled him out, put him in little birdie rehab again. We made it so that this little guy got more pleasure hits than any gray shrike who had ever lived. Okay? At the end of that life, would it have been a good life? It's kind of interesting. It's like, it seems like the pursuit of pleasure is the most important thing that there is, but what's happening? What are we missing if, in fact, if that's what his life is made out of? What's missing? Yes? The long-term goal is sacrificed. What do we? You're on to something. I could tell. You're buzzing around it. Let's just look back briefly. Let's look at this. This is what the organism was designed by nature to think is everything that's important. In fact, the pursuit of happiness is not a conscious goal of people or animals typically. It's the pursuit of pleasure that's the conscious goal. The pursuit of happiness or the happiness is simply a guidance system that's helping you along the way. But you can see that if we short-circuit our way to the pleasure, we sacrifice all of this. Okay? We sacrifice almost everything, 95% of the best that life has to offer. Pleasure is just simply a very, very short-term, biologically expensive, heavy-handed message that says that the DNA is being reproduced or critically important survival things are taking place. But the moods of happiness are actually a much gentler, much longer drawn-out signaling device that in fact is not limited. That you can be in a mood of happiness all day long as you're making progress towards worthwhile goals, but you cannot be in pleasure all day long. That is not possible. Okay? So this is what will happen to this gray shrike is exactly what happened to Elvis Presley. Okay? This guy lived at a time when the TV, movie, and recording industries were just maturing enough to land adulation on one guy, and he was it. And that man lived his life inside of a gilded cage where he could push all kinds of these magic buttons. And by the time he was my age, he was long since 6 feet under the ground. Okay? Towards the end of his life, which ended at 42 years old, he was really looking to spirituality, looking for some kind of guidance to try to find his internal compass, and couldn't find it. And the reason is that the pleasure trap is so confusing, okay, that when it feels like you are doing exactly the right thing, you're not. Okay. What is happiness? Motherhood, grandmotherhood, positive cash flow. Happiness is the activation of happiness circuits. Now we know what that is. And happiness circuits are activated when the instincts inside the mind of whatever kind of organism it is tells it that it's making progress towards worthwhile goals. And that's what happens in people. Now, we see how dangerous the traps are, that we understand the motivational triad now. We could see how to trap it. The pleasure-seeking trap could be like the giving of cocaine or a drug or something like that. We could trap an organism's nervous system. We could also, a big problem with modern medicine, despite a great many things that are beneficial about modern medicine, one of the very destructive things about it is that you can artificially get yourself out of pain very easily. And if you do so, we can mask the underlying problem and allow further damage to take place. We could have also called this the pain avoidance trap. Also, the problems of energy conservation, allowing people to be really sedentary, be out of shape, and cut every corner possible. That we could call that the energy conservation trap. But Alan just said, forget it. We're not doing all those things. That's too complicated. We're going to call this thing the pleasure trap. And in it, we're going to be talking about how the motivational triad can be subverted if people are not paying attention and kind of allowing their instincts to just go where they will in the modern world. Now, we're going to now talk about the biggest pleasure trap